In this episode of the podcast, I want to talk about how flexible you can be with your training and still make progress. So, what do I mean by how flexible you can be? I am definitely not talking about how bendy you are. I'm not going into yoga and talking about if a yogi is the best way to approach your desires to build muscle and hypertrophy and all that sort of stuff. We are not going down that route. However, some people change their workouts all the damn time. Others barely change a thing for freaking decades. So, who has got the right approach when it comes to building muscle? Whose method of training is going to yield the most gains, and how flexible can your training actually be before you start to put real limits on your ability to make progress and achieve those muscle building goals? These are the questions that I will be answering over the course of the next few minutes. To clarify though, before we get into that, this podcast is about maximum hypertrophy. Hypertrophy meaning building muscle. That's what we're talking about. Now, when I say hypertrophy and maximum building muscle, that doesn't mean that this is going to turn you into an absolute incredible Hulk looking freak. That's not what I mean. What I mean is what we're looking at maximum hypertrophy is basically saying, right, you want a goal of maybe building a little bit of muscle, getting a little bit more toned if you want to use that sort of phrase. That's going to essentially mean you need to build muscle and probably lose body fat depending on where your starting point is. So to do that, we really want to build muscle in the most efficient way possible because it takes fucking forever. And if you are someone who is fearful of being, I don't want to be too big. I don't want to get too jacked like a bodybuilder. You won't. It's going to take absolutely an inordinate amount of time for you to get to that point. So, by adopting processes right now that allow you to build muscle maximally in the most efficient and effective way possible, well, you'll get to your goals quicker than you would otherwise. And at that point, you can say, right, I'm as big as I want to be. I don't want to get any more muscle in this body part, that body part, whatever. Just bring your training volume down to maintenance. You don't have to go and keep going. And, even though you still won't probably become a genetic freak at that point, again, it can allay your fears that actually you call the shots. You don't wake up the next day and think, shit, where did all this freaking muscle come from? Doesn't work like that. The other point I wanted to make is that I'm not talking about strength here, and I'm not talking about training for shits and giggles. So if you are someone who wants to be a powerlifter, this is not applicable to you. And if you're someone who wants to go to the gym because you want to do legs, bums, and tums with your friends, that's cool. Or you want to do a Zumba class, that's cool. But that's not what this podcast is about. This is about what happens when you adjust your training, you're flexible with your training, and your goal is maximal muscle gain. That's what we want to be talking about. That all said, that all under the bridge. Hopefully you're still with me at this point. The Zumba kind of, the collection of Zumba people, what is that? I don't know. The Zumbettes. The Zumbettes have kind of left the building, but hopefully you're with me now. Anyway, progressive overload is the main driver of muscle gain. We want to incrementally increase the amount of load. That doesn't just mean weight. What we mean is the amount of tension that's being applied to our muscles over the course of a period of time. That's what we want to focus on. There are other mechanisms for us to build muscle, but this is going to be the main one. That's the main one we're going to be focusing in on over the course of the amount of time that we're training, progressively overloading. And again, I'll reiterate, that doesn't just mean adding weight to the bar. You could do more reps with the same weight. That is still progressive overload. You could do more sets with the same reps and the same weight. You could basically increase your form, improve the way that you execute an exercise. There are 3 other ways in which you can achieve progressive overload. And on top of that, increasing weight, and actually mix the 4 together. That's going to be the best way for you to improve progressive overload. Okay, so on one level, we could look at the fact that our muscles don't know the exercise that we're performing. There is a video that I saw with Mr. Arnold Schwarzenegger. I know he was a hero of mine back then, but he has said a little bit of shit over the course of his years. And he said, well, you need to mix it up. You need to shock the body and all that sort of stuff. Apologies for the accent. But you need to shock the body. And he talked about when I'm doing chest, then I go to the the body knows I'm going to the bench press first. Then he knows I'm going to go and do flies. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I don't think that's true, Arnie. I don't think your pecs have an actual brain where they're figuring out, yeah, Arnie's going to go do some bench presses now, so we don't need to work. We know what's coming. We know what's coming. It doesn't work like that. Sharking the muscles is not a thing. So we don't need to do that. But we could say that our muscles don't know what exercise we are doing. So as long as we understand we're trying to place tension on those muscles, well, as long as we're doing that and we're increasing that amount of tension that we create. So for example, if we use something like a chest fly, for example, if I am basically trying to do in a chest fly, I'm bringing my upper arm across my chest. That's kind of what the job of the pec is. If you imagine the pec, broadly speaking, it attaches in a few different places, one of them being down the sternum. Now, it then it originates down the sternum and also other places, but that's just one of them. And also on the upper arm. So the job, if you imagine that, okay, if there was a piece of string that attached from your sternum to your upper arm and you pulled that in the direction of your sternum, well, what would happen? It would bring your arm across your chest. That is essentially what the pec's doing. Therefore, if we have this amount of tension that's being created, this amount of force that's being applied, if we could figure out how to incrementally increase that amount of tension, well, it doesn't really matter what exercise we pick as long as that tension is increasing. Now, that's got nothing to do with weight. That's to do with the mechanics of the exercise and so on and so forth. So that's a nice idea, but it's not really practical. It's not really practical for most people, the majority of people who are just trying to go to the gym to improve a little bit of muscle, improve their physiques. I'm not there sitting thinking about, okay, well, what's the degree of tension that I'm placing around this joint and, all these joint forces. You're not really thinking in those ways. You're just saying, well, okay, what exercise do I need to do and how many reps? And so, yes, it's a nice idea, but it's not practical. So the simple fact of it is we need structure. Most people need a little bit of structure, a framework with which to work in so that to as much degree as it is knowable, that you are increasing mechanical tension on a muscle. We need that structure. We need that framework of some description if we want to build muscle in the most efficient and effective way possible. So that is why it's important to keep stability within a training program. And, I am a big proponent of keeping training programs fairly stable and consistent for a relatively, compared to other people, longish period of time. That might be, say, 4, 6, 8 weeks, something like that. And again, even though we're making changes, they are minimal. Now, the positives of keeping those exercise constant. Well, there's no new learning curve. Every time you introduce a new exercise, you've got to learn it. Even if you knew what it was way back when, you've still got to find your feet. You're finding your feet with that exercise. You're finding in terms of, okay, well, kind of how do I need to set up this machine correctly for me? That's going to add time to your workout, if nothing else. You're then going to think about, well, what load do I need to lift? And you're going to then start to work on the execution of that exercise. Practice makes perfect in terms of that side of things. So again, you're going to go through this learning curve, which is going to eat away at your ability to start to progressively overload on that particular exercise. You're going to also be able to improve form if you've got consistent exercises. So for example, again, if you're in that situation where you're not on this learning curve every 5 minutes, but you are, say, doing bench press, squat, or something like that, you can work on your technique while also, trying to increase load, increase repetitions. You're increasing that form. You're really getting good at the skill of doing that exercise. If you're chopping and changing your workout every week or every time you enter the gym or whatever, then that's going to be much more difficult to do. Your ability to get better at that movement, to be better at that skill, is going to be compromised. The other thing is that it's much easier to demonstrate incremental progressive overload through more reps, more weight, and more sets by having consistency. If you're, again, like bench pressing, fly, bicep curl, whatever it is, if you are tracking how you're doing on that particular movement over the course of a period of time, well, you can actually start to demonstrate and measure the amount of progress that you're making. Now, increasing weight, for example, and is not necessarily the absolute indicator of whether you're building muscle, but over the course of a long period of time, it's a very good indicator. Broadly speaking, if you are gaining strength, you're probably gaining muscle at the same time. And obviously, you've got other mechanisms by which to see if you are changing your physique and building muscle at the same time. So by keeping exercises consistent, by tracking, by having these measurable ways of assessing progressive overload, you can be confident you are improving. And that's a key thing. But there are some potential negatives to kind of keeping things constant. So some people will get bored. That's quite a valid thing. You know, a training program on paper is only actually very good if you can actually stick to it. Otherwise, it's pretty pointless. So some people might get bored. Training might become formulaic. So if you're in that sort of Arnie scenario where you think, okay, well, I'm just going to go do bench press. If you're not really focused in and kind of really focused in on what you're doing, it might just be, you know, just go through the motions because it's the same thing each and every time. So if you are the type of person that doesn't think like that, then it's not a problem for you. But otherwise, some people just need that different stimulus each and every time. But I think personally, it's a bad idea to keep changing your workouts if your goal is muscle gain. So some people will say, well, you know, I like CrossFit and CrossFitters are jacked and stuff like that. Cool, great. If you like CrossFit, go do CrossFit. You will build muscle doing CrossFit. That's why CrossFitters are jacked. Well, CrossFitters are jacked because they probably train 3 fucking times a day and they're professionals and they're probably taking a few under the counter supplements. Anyway, so we can go through this process of, you know, doing CrossFit or whatever it is, you know, you go into the gym or just change everything up and all that sort of stuff. You will build muscle because you are lifting weights and then, you know, you're probably going to increase weight over the course of time. You're probably going to get some form of gains in there. And, you know, you could essentially, if you're just tracking overall set volume per muscle group, again, you could probably extrapolate that you're probably going to make some gains, but it kind of falls into this, you know, ether of, I'm not quite sure. It doesn't give you the, like, maybe it's my type A personality, but I like the data. I like to know that I am progressing. I like to measure what I'm doing so that I know I'm moving in the right direction each time I go in the gym or each time I do a training program or something like that. So that would be kind of those sorts of things. Obviously, the flip side of that is, like I mentioned before, you've got a learning curve. If you're changing exercises all the time, you're going to go through a learning curve each and every time. And it might be the case that, yet, like I said, it's difficult for you to measure that progress accurately. So if you love a different workout every week, cool, go for it. But don't come to me to fucking program it because I don't really entertain the idea of doing that. I think that for me, it takes a good coach to know when something is working and it doesn't need changing. Some of my own personal workouts, I've got exercises in my program that never change, ever, because I know that they fit me well in terms of my body, my mechanics. They suit my goal. They fit every sort of requirement for being in a training program. So why would I change them for an inferior exercise? It just doesn't make sense to me. Now, obviously there are variants that I can go through and different ways of looking at exercise and different ways of challenging muscles and things like that. And I will swap out certain exercises. And I will, if I change my goals, for example, if I want to do a little bit more focus on side delts or some other particular muscle group, and I'm increasing the set volume for that muscle group, then I might incorporate a few different exercises in which to approach that muscle from different angles and different ways and to keep that interesting. But ultimately, I'm looking for progressions. I'm looking for ways that I can measure how I'm moving forward with my training. And if you're changing everything all the time, it's probably not going to be beneficial for you. However, as long as you are training, you're probably making some progress. You're probably making some form of incremental change to your physique, which if that's what you want, cool, go for it. But as I said right at the beginning, if your goal is to build muscle in the most efficient and effective way possible, then have the balls or the ovaries to stick to one training program for long enough to see results and only make minor tweaks when you absolutely need to and when it makes sense to do so. Don't create an inferior training program because you're kind of getting a little bit bored with a particular training program. Again, maybe it's just my personality, but personally, I like to see progress. That's what gives me motivation. I get motivation from seeing my physique change and not necessarily from, I don't get more motivation or anything like that from doing a different exercise. That really doesn't enter my brain in that way. What I like to see is my body changing? I enjoy going to the gym, lifting weights, whatever. Maybe you can call me a bro on that side of things, but I like the process of lifting weights. I like the process of pushing myself to my limits. That's the part of the process that I enjoy. And seeing changes off of the back of that, that's what gives me motivation. I don't need to change exercises every 5 seconds in order to improve what I'm doing in the gym or to change and improve my physique. So always bear that in mind. Yes, you can change your program frequently if you want to, but I think that the more you change your program, the more you are limiting the rate at which you make progress. Unless, of course, you just happen to just nail progressive overload just randomly, and therefore you make a huge amount of progress. Likewise, again, if you're just doing it for fun and you're not really worried about building muscle and not worried about building muscle fast and stuff like that, then cool, have at it, go for it. But I think that there is definitely, for most people out there who have a goal of building muscle, toning up, whatever you want to call it, doing this sort of stuff in the most efficient way is going to be hugely beneficial for you. Now, that is my take then on how frequently you can still, how flexible you can be with your training and still make progress.